Welcome to AI Snacks with Romy and Robbie, an AI literacy podcast, and I am your host, Anastassia, and I have to tell you, I have been looking forward to this episode for quite some time, and not only because I have one of my favorite people joining me here, and this is Rae Muhlstock, and she's back with us to discuss another portrait of AI in literature and in movies. But I was looking towards this recording because it's not just about technology, but it's about human emotions and feelings, including grief and memory. And it's about those questions: what makes a life real? What makes a presence so woven into the fabric of daily existence that when it's gone, you don't just miss it, but you are kind of questioning, am I still complete? Is it me? Or is something of me kind of, disappeared forever? And this podcast started with a conviction, which I hold very, very dearly and deeply. I truly believe we must understand and know AI in order to truly benefit from it. And of course, I offer you episodes with technologists, and we discuss what is inside of an LLM, and we discuss governance or how AI changes the landscape of healthcare or education, or what does it bring to small businesses. But I believe that the most important AI questions are not always those about engineering and mathematics. Technology does not exist just for the sake of existence. It exists in culture, and it exists in stories. And it was my heart desire to actually dedicate a full series of AI snacks to exploring how AI is portrayed in movies and books. And this is not because fiction is actually representing some facts, but because fiction asks the questions that facts sometimes fail to surface. And those questions are, what does it mean to create something that thinks? And what do we owe this thing? And what does it owe us? And of course, those are not mathematical or engineering questions. And at their deepest, they are questions about what it means to exist, to be alive, to experience friendship and love, to experience family. So, my dear Rae, welcome. I'm really thrilled that you are back with us. So, how are you?
I am wonderful. And it's so great to be back and talking about a story and film that I'm very passionate about. So thank you for having me back, and thank all of you for listening. And hello.
Yeah, so Rae, just to remind you, is a lecturer in writing and critical inquiry at the University at Albany in the state of New York. And she teaches science fiction in books and in movies. And she gets inspired not just by some contemporaries, but by Greek mythology. And I think this is actually great because so many things we are seeing today on screens and experience in books, they are deeply rooted in the history of humanity, starting with the old myths and fairy tales. And Rae, you've just suggested that we discuss young in a short story and as a movie. Why did you pick this piece of literature?
So the short story, Saying Goodbye to Yang, sometimes also called After Yang, really depends on if you got a copy before the film or after, is originally published in Alexander Weinstein's collection, Children of the New World, published in 2016. Gorgeous book of short stories, all looking at different facets of the human interaction with AI. One of the reasons that I really wanted to discuss this story with you, and in particular the movements, adaptive movements from the story to the film, is, I think, exactly how you put it so beautifully. Fiction addresses questions that facts neglect to answer or to question, or fail to question, or cannot question. Facts tend to give us concrete answers, or at least as far as we know the world as it is right now. But there's so much in the world that we can't see, that we can't measure, including ourselves. Not our physical beings, but our metaphysical beings, our emotional beings, our intellectual beings, and how we respond to the changing world. This universe that Alexander Weinstein creates is fascinating to me in all of the different ways that it examines artificial intelligence, including through clones. This idea of a physical a human artificial copy. So this is not a robot, this is a clone. And this is a world that's so steeped in these different forms of artificial intelligence that it forces us as readers, as well as the humans within the story, to rethink our universe, to rethink our definitions of things like life and what it means to be alive and have memories and have feelings and family. These are all really challenged in the story and the film in ways that facts could never truly address. And so I thought it would be absolutely fascinating to discuss with you, to bring our different perspectives to the conversation.
I would love to ask you a question about Weinstein as a writer.
Yes.
So he published in 2016. It was before the whole wave of modern generative AI, before the mainstream conversation about AI companions. So obviously today it's very much en vogue, and there are several companies, for example, You Are AI, which can kind of, productize you as a human being on some pieces of you, and put it in a form, I would describe it as an AI chatbot. Yeah. Training on your data, on your personal data, on what you would like to give it, not on the data which sits on the internet. And of course, then you can enlarge in all kind of shapes and ways you want it. So he is writing before this reality surfaces. And I am reading his stories, and it sounds almost prophetic. I wonder, what does he understand about technology that most people, most fiction writers miss, in your eyes?
As someone who is passionate about science fiction and a professor of science fiction, as you mentioned, and I do teach this in my AI, sci-fi, and science fiction course. I teach both the story and the movie. I really like them together. We'll get more into that in a few minutes. I always tell my students that the best science fiction is prophetic. The big difference for me as a reader of science fiction versus fantasy is the scientific method. And forgive me if I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but science fiction authors look at the world as it is, form a hypothesis, and the fiction almost becomes the method section in this theoretical experiment. We can experiment in literature as we can't in real life. You can't put humans in these kinds of situations ethically. Right. In real life, we call those war crimes, but you can in fiction, and you can test responses. And in a lot of ways, I think this story is one of those science fictions that really utilizes the scientific method in this really creative fictional way. And this is, for me, one of the beautiful things about science fiction. Weinstein is looking at what we're already doing in the world as of when he started writing these stories, which would have been a bit before 2016. But I don't think it's a coincidence that it's set in China. We already knew that there were experiments, social experiments, implementing AI because of things like population control. They're facing very different set of social questions that we are in America or you are in Europe. And AI became a bigger part of the experimentation there much earlier than it did in the rest of the world. And I think that's part of what Weinstein is looking at here as part of his experiment. What happens when cultural exchange occurs on the AI level? And I don't just mean microchips, I mean a more social cultural exchange. I had the absolute pleasure of interviewing Alexander Weinstein in, I believe it was 2022 or 3. It was a spring semester. There was snow on the ground. And one of the things that we discussed was how he had gone from a very almost black and white, simple view of AI to a much more complex one, sometimes within the course of a day. And when we get to talking about the movie, I will share a story that occurred during that interview with him. But he said even through the act of writing these stories, his opinions would change. He would start thinking one thing and he would end thinking somewhere else. And I think that really speaks to the power of science fiction to change minds and to open up worlds, to have us consider the real life implications of possibilities that, while they don't exist now, absolutely can. These stories are grounded in reality. This is not outer space, alien, as wonderful as those stories can be. And we're recording this as Andy Weir's Project Hail Mary, which has nothing to do with AI, by the way. But while this is in theaters, which is another one of my favorite sci-fi novels, again, having nothing to do with AI, but a beautiful novel. I have yet to see the film adaptation, Although I've been told by people who love the novel, it is fantastic. But that's maybe grounded in a future that's much farther away from us. This is a future that feels so close at hand that it becomes almost sublime, like the artistic sublime. We almost can't conceive in certain ways of this future because it is so close at hand. Kind of like Black Mirror, it's a very near future.
Yeah.
And I was reminded as you were talking about the place of AI, in particular in grief, of a Black Mirror episode called Be Right Back, starring Haley Atwell. Gorgeous episode, very problematic, and maybe has a place in the conversation, in particular about grief. So I think what's so powerful about these stories and about the way Alexander Weinstein thinks about not just AI, but his ethos on science fiction is plausibility, grounded in reality, really grounded in the science. What are we now and where are we going if we continue in this trajectory, applying the scientific method to our behaviors, to our culture? I had mentioned clones and living alongside, they call them techno sapiens in the film. So the AI figures end up occupying an entirely new category of being, almost like an evolutionary step. And this is alarmingly necessary once you really start thinking about this world. Kira and it's Jim in the story, Jake in the film, have to adopt, or they feel in the story that it's their sort of calling to adopt. We also see families that are built with AI, like their family. This is a multicultural, multinational, multi-species family. But their next door neighbors, George, Dana, and the twins, are clones. And this is a real point of contention for Jim throughout the story, his prejudice against clones. Now, this is a world where humans have stopped reproducing at the regular rate. Families are built through clones or through AI or through adoption. And this is a world that a lot of sci-fi brings us to, the sort of extinction or endangerment of everything we know to be human. Weinstein looks at that and gives us different ways of evolving, not rebelling, not cowering in fear, but evolving. The way we think about humanity, the way we think about family, the way we think about being. They are chilling, sometimes thrilling, sometimes very optimistic, but always very powerful as science fiction.
Rae, I would love to ask you to introduce the story, maybe not to the full details, but most people who are listening to us today, they have never read it. Could you maybe give us the structure of the narrative? What happens there?
Yeah, the plot is very simple. A family, mother, father, adopted daughter from China, and an AI son that they adopted as a second sibling who they do refer to at times as their son as part of the family. He breaks down. Essentially, he dies. That is the whole plot. That is the whole plot. Very, very simple. Where the story develops its tension is in Jim, who is our focalizing character, the father, him trying to understand his own emotions while saying goodbye to Yang or after Yang. And I really like the switch in titles after the film, but I'll get into that in just a moment. So the story itself on the level of plot is simply one of loss. It's a story we all know well. It's part of the human condition. Where the sci-fi intervention comes is, how do we grieve someone who may or may not have ever been alive? So what we come to witness is Jim's mind wavering back and forth. Is Yang his son? Right? He tries to bond with him, is constantly kind of reminded that Yang is not quite human, and yet can't seem to fight this impulse to mourn him as if he were a son, in the same way he would mourn his daughter. And I find the end, the final line, if I'm allowed to share, there are no spoilers here, but the final line is, I stand next to her looking at the flowers George sent, acknowledging how little I truly know about this world. And that's where the true tension of the story comes in, how little we, watching Jim as the stand-in for us all, truly understand about the world that surrounds us, about the worlds within us, and about how those worlds collide and interact. And in its simplicity, the story is truly beautiful.
When I was reading this, so there's this moment when Yang breaks down, and then the family discovers it had a hidden memory device embedded inside him, and it's a kind of a small system recording a few seconds of each day. Those might be what we call memories, or most significant daily moments. And then Jim or Jake, depending on whether it's a short story or a film, he starts watching those moments, and it is becoming increasingly clear that Yang had an entire interior life and no one was aware about it. So he noticed beauty, he had preferences, he stored some segments, but probably not others. He had some archive of things that mattered to him. And do you think that this is the moment in a story when we as readers realize that Yang was conscious? You know, consciousness is a huge, big debate. Sometimes what is today called consciousness in AI, in my eyes, is nonsense, because none of the AIs today can display consciousness. And I'm really struggling that we apply human language. So we are talking about reasoning, for example. When we describe what those systems today are doing. So we do not have the architecture today which will completely implement an AI capable of learning from counterfactuals, learning from scenarios, displaying causality, then having a world model and an inner model, and understand minds, its own and someone else's. So we do not have right now those architectures. We might have them. There's research about it. So I'm struggling when we apply human language to something which today is far, far away from what the story describes. But when we come back to the story, so this is the moment where we think, okay, this being is conscious. So how did you understand this moment, just you personally? And maybe they are interesting insights when you share it with your students. So what do you think here?
So this for me is the real change between the story and the film, and why I think the title Saying Goodbye to Yang works well for the story but not for the film. After Yang is the right title for the film. It shifts the focus. Saying Goodbye to Yang, the focus is on the human. Our saying goodbye. After Yang, the focus is on Yang. And as my students put it, we watch him go from an it to a he. Right. And it's that question of interiority, being an agent, a subject, and not just a thing. And if you're watching and not just listening, you can see that my jewelry actually is supposed to reflect this change. You may have seen these earrings before.
Yes.
They're little robots, but my necklace is simply a face. It's modeled on a Greek mask with a mouth. The necklace being Yang in the story, detachable parts. I don't want to give away the ending, but the voice is particularly important in the ending, whereas in the film, Yang is a whole, I would say almost a person. The film, in fact, insists that Yang has an identity. It's a persistent motif. There's this beautiful use of mirrors in the film. It's subtle, it's nuanced. Kogonada, truly a beautiful director. I would call the film quiet in the best ways that sci-fi can be.
Yeah.
Relies on framing, on lighting, on really superb acting. So it stars Colin Farrell playing Jake, who is the Jim character. I do not know why they changed the name, but it happens sometimes. Maybe Colin Farrell did not see himself as a Jim. Sure. Jodie Turner-Smith plays Kira or Kyra, pronounced both ways. And Justin H. Min plays Yang. And the Mika, a beautiful little performance from Michaela Emma, I believe is her name. Really beautiful singing voice too. There's a song she sings that's particularly important to the film. The film is telling us at every moment that Yang is a person, maybe not a human, a technosapien, and insists upon Yang's interiority. So we really get to explore his memories alongside Colin Farrell's character Jake. And I think for us as viewers, we have the realization at the same moment he does. I think we always want to believe that something that looks like us can be like us. And this is where the uncanny valley often derives its power. So the minute we see AI in human form, a different kind of relationship develops to, for instance, ChatGPT, which is why it can become useful in terms of companionship. Although we're so inured now to digital companionship through text messages that maybe we'll bypass the body entirely someday. And again, this is why I think that science fiction is important. We don't have these models, as you say, yet, but science fiction gives us ways of understanding how we could deal with it. And one of those ways is the way Jake does in the story, which is, as one of my students, Arlenis Picardo, put it, grief as archaeology. He doesn't understand how he can be grieving AI. So he starts exploring, tracking down people who knew Yang, combing through his memories. And the memories are extremely interesting, the way they're visually portrayed, both hyper order and chaos. There's almost this barely visible relief of a forest and the sound of birds behind this like grid, a very digital grid. Jake looks through them the way we would look through a file. You open a folder, there are lots of different files. So the interaction is very digital, but what he's finding within it is very human. What originally looks like these random clips that really have no logic, no sense, no order. But as he starts thinking more about them, he sees that it's Yang recognizing beauty, family, memories he wants to hold on to, things that were special to him. A lot of the little girl, the time spent with the little girl, but relationships. We see him develop relationships. And then the film also gives us Jake and Kira's version of those memories. So sometimes we'll see a clip from Yang's point of view, just a little snippet, but then we'll see the whole moment from Jake's point of view, where we see Yang in the interaction, constantly bringing Yang into the memories, the way Jake and Kira see them. So there's this beautiful interplay between the natural, the artificial, the organic, the mechanical. And we would think that they work in opposition. But Yang is a testament that maybe life is more complicated on all of its levels.
Yeah.
Internal, external, and the other. So I think they work best when they work together, because in the story, Yang is entirely external. We just see what Jake can see of Yang. There's a moment where he mentions they're trying to have this bonding experience, and he can hear liquid hitting the empty stomach canister. There's the scene in the film, you can hear it. Like we can hear it, the audience. And it's so quiet in the background as they're talking about the experience of drinking tea. It's just such a quiet way of reminding us that he's not human, just at the moment where we can forget because we're watching a character forget. It's this beautiful tension between the human and the artificial that makes us ultimately question both.
You know what is very interesting? A couple of moments. So why I loved the story when I was reading this, it immediately gave me a feeling. And I must admit, I must make a confession. I am not the biggest fan of sci-fi because mostly it gives me some kind, food of thoughts. It is an intellectual entertainment and exercise, but I don't have a feeling. When I read Neil Stevenson, great writer, fantastic books. It doesn't talk to my senses. When I read one scene, it touches my senses immediately. And I don't want to make any literary comparisons here. But for example, some of my friends are asking me why I'm reading Marcel Proust. It's unreadable. Why? And I'm saying, I'm not reading this for the story. I'm just reading this for the feeling, because it's like music to me. I'm kind of immersed in those waves of language. I can sense most septically some descriptions, and I can smell certain things, and I can find myself in the streets of Paris. And here we have a short story which really touches our senses. And I think that the aesthetics of the movie are touching our senses quite closely and profoundly. And here comes one important truth about today's AIs. So many people, though those AIs are far away from Yang, they mimic human interaction. And people believe actually that this thing there is providing truthful responses. And there is something out there which is in deep conversation with a human. But because those AIs don't reason, because they are not complete, they don't have the world and self model, they don't understand the mind and how they are built, they are pleasing the person, they might actually become very dangerous. And I was reading a couple of weeks ago papers from psychiatrists who are saying at some point in time, we need to put like a label on those LLMs, like on the tobacco products, dangerous. So they reinforce, for example, some crazy beliefs of real people. And this is why we must understand how those models work. It's not just some technology like electricity. Yes, we all use electricity just to live. But when electricity is being used in factories, it does not dictate the design of the product. It facilitates.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that current AIs, because they're not complete, they're far away from what we perceive as intelligence, but they mimic as if they were on pair. I think this is what we must understand. And of course, the whole story, the film is about tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, not about the day as it is today. So how do you think about this controversy and about feelings versus, what is really out there? And do you agree that understanding or forcing the understanding on what is there in front of us is important? Maybe I am riding a wrong horse here.
No, I think you're exactly right. I just want to circle back. Proust actually changed the game of narrative studies. We think about storytelling entirely differently in English departments because of Proust.
I did not
So,
know that. It's
yeah,
unbelievable.
just
Yeah.
a little plug for narrative theory. But the way we tell stories is sometimes more important than the story itself. As I said, this is an extremely simple plot and an extremely universal plot. So the question isn't what happens, it's how we react to what happens. And I would actually call your response to this story Weinstein's great success with this story, because I think that's exactly what he was trying to achieve with this, is to make us think about how we interact with science, with I love the idea of chatbots coming with warnings, because we already are seeing those stories of one of them perpetuating hate speech. There's stories of horrible instances of suicidal ideation perpetuated by chatbots. Personally, I think part of the problem comes from the fact that we keep trying to get them to do what we can already do. And so when I teach my AI sci-fi and philosophy course, the real emphasis is on what does it mean to be human, and what can we do that cannot be made artificial, and what can a machine do that we can't? And so where is the collaborative space? I think that's sort of the idea behind a Yang when he was invented, this sort of idea of a cultural exchange bot that could come teach Mika, the little girl who was adopted from China, because there was a big earthquake and there are a lot of orphans, and Jim and Kira in the story feel it's their, they're white couple. They've lived a life of privilege. In fact, they're such a stereotypical white couple. One works at Pottery Barn and one works at Whole Foods. Maybe that only really carries weight in America, but that is pretty much as white and privileged as you can get in terms of stereotype. In the movie, interestingly, it's a it's a multiracial and multinational family. Two different accents, Colin Farrell and Jodie Turner-Smith, two different races. And then we have the Chinese daughter and the technosapien son, right, who looks Chinese but is actually technosapien. So the world has gotten bigger, right, in this adaptation. I think both are important for us to think about in terms of the way we interact with AI. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm wondering, when you talk to your students and you explore portrayals of AI somewhere and how authors or filmmakers imagined these interactions with technology, I wonder whether you explore sometimes why do people write or take some written material and transform it into visual pictures. Because, what strikes me quite a bit, and I think I said it multiple times in my keynotes, maybe even on this podcast, I can't stand it when people ask ChatGPT to summarize Proust. I even don't want to imagine what will come out of, like Love of Swan, or summarize Anna Karenina. Because the summary of Anna Karenina is the novel Anna Karenina. This is the summary.
This is actually my least favorite thing that AI is doing for us currently, is the summarizing.
Yeah. And I'm just wondering, because, wouldn't be maybe advisable that there is a disclaimer. Of course, we can kind of, summarize like the plot. So there are a couple of people exploring whatsoever. and this is the grand finale. But actually saying that reading it opens a world of whatsoever. 19th century Russia, 19th century France, the inner world of protagonists and why those are important and might have been important for the writer to explore. So I'm really wondering whether the simplification for the sake of some mindless productivity is something worthwhile and something to seek. So what is your response to this?
I think that maybe, so part of the problem is you can't summarize art,
Yeah.
right? A plot synopsis is simply a plot synopsis. As I said, this story has the simplest plot. Someone dies.
Yeah.
That's plot tells us nothing. Not about art, maybe about something else, maybe a scientific paper, although I would tell my students, please read it yourself. That's the whole point. But especially in literature, film, in visual art, the experience is the point, not the plot. So as you say, it opens up this inner world. You don't get that in a plot synopsis. Someone dies, tells us nothing about the characters, nothing about the world, nothing about the universal experience or the individual experience, right? Someone dies, well, my laptop dies, right? And that's sort of part of the tension in this story is losing Yang, is saying goodbye to Yang the same thing as replacing a cell phone? Right? Or is there something more human going on here? So I think when we summarize literature, art, like I don't want a summary of Guernica. I want to go
No.
see Picasso's painting, which I have, by the way. The scope of it. I love museums, in particular art museums. I travel all over the world and constantly am seeing things I've seen pictures of. And you get no sense of them. We were in Amsterdam over the summer and went to the Van Gogh Museum, and standing in front of the sunflowers was an entirely different experience. I can't even describe how little a 2D image can actually tell you about what he did there, about
Absolutely.
the texture, the way the light moves across the It's stunning, completely different experience in person. And art is always going to do that. You can have the Mona Lisa on a t-shirt, but when you see it in person, it's a different experience.
Absolutely.
We would call this the aura, right?
Yeah.
Real art has this aura. Literature cannot exist in its summary form. That's not literature. Literature is style. Literature is words. It's imagery. It's the way they're put together. Somebody dies, that story can be told infinite ways. It's not about the plot. It's about the way that story is told. And that is what literature is. It's the way the stories are told. So I think you're missing the whole point of art if AI is summarizing it. And I tell my students that the whole point of college is to learn how to read these materials, even if it's a science paper, and not to have AI summarize it for you. You know, having said that, we certainly had Cliff Notes, Monarch Notes.
Of course.
So the idea of summarizing is not new, but I think the conceit before AI was that these are used to enhance and support, not to replace.
Of course. And whenever we generate a transcript of a podcast, of a lecture, it's a huge help, but it does not replace how we kind of, maneuver this labyrinth of ambiguity, which lives are about. And we are moving now toward our close, but before we get there, I want to tell our listeners what you and I are planning. So it's not the last episode in the series on portrayals of AI in films and in books. The series is growing, and I'm wondering, Rae, what would you like to explore in the series? What kind of books would you like to put on the table? What kind of movies would you like to discuss?
Well, before we get into that, I want to share one short story about my visit with Alexander Weinstein.
Please.
I collaborate with the New York State Writers Institute. Every semester I teach my honors classes alongside their visiting authors series. The New York State Writers Institute is this absolutely incredible, literary institute where they bring authors to campus, several every semester, fiction, nonfiction, all genres, filmmakers. Then they host conversations, really important cultural conversations, including last year one surrounding AI. So that was the occasion that I got to interview Alexander Weinstein. In fact, twice in one day was for the New York State Writers Institute. The first time we talked about his stories, and I asked him, and this question came from my students. I asked him, does Yang have a soul? And he did not hesitate. He said, no. Like, I was crazy for asking the question. But then in the evening, we stopped, we had dinner, and then I interviewed him again. We did a film screening. So the audience got to watch the film with us. I was sitting with him when we watched it. And then we got up to do a second interview, and I asked him again, does Yang have a soul? And he was like, oh, wow, Rae, I think he might. And I think this is why they work together so well.
Yeah.
The story and the film. The way we understand Yang changes as we get to know him, as we get to recognize him as an agent, as a being, not a human being, but a being with desires, with a sense of beauty, with a way of interacting with the universe and with relationships with other beings. And I think that's maybe one of the most important takeaways from any of these AI fictions is that once we create an artificial intelligence, there's a certain obligation to that intelligence.
Absolutely.
So moving forward in our series, which I'm so excited to be doing with you, I love how we can sort of hone in on the themes of these stories through the different kinds of questions we ask. It's absolutely wonderful. And I'm calling on the audience to suggest a few to us. I certainly have
Please.
lots of ideas. There is a new book out by William Alexander. He's a National Book Award winner. He writes young adult and young reader literature, which is stunning. I've actually taught some of his quote young reader novels in college. But he has one out that he says is his first novel for an adult or a mature, much more mature audience. And I'm only partway through the book, but already I'm seeing this incredibly nuanced, challenging way of thinking about AI as both embodied and immaterial. And I would love to explore the question of AI bodies and
Yes.
immateriality and those implications with you, with someone who really knows what they're talking about.
And embodiment is one of the things which is quite decisive for intelligence. You know, this is my personal ambiguity, what intelligence is. And of course, there are thousands of definitions. So there's this very famous definition of Max Tegmark, who is an astronomer, astrophysicist, AI researcher, and he's talking about intelligence as information processing. But for example, last year I visited the Biennale on architecture in Venice, and there were several artifacts and several pieces in the exhibition on the intelligence of plants and stones and microbes and bacteria. I guess plants process information to live. This is a very different information you and I are processing when we are discussing sci-fi and literature. But who actually decided that our processing is superior to what plants are doing or what microbes might be doing with stones and with the soil? Who is there to claim that we are superior? I think that this respect towards what is around us, it should be in every corner of our life. And this is why I love discussing those portrayals. We might not save the world and we might not explore everything, but it makes us think. And
Yes.
ultimately, just encouraging thinking. This is what learning and what life is about for many, many humans. Yeah.
You're going to have to tell me about the intelligence of stones. That blew my mind a little bit. But I think this brings us back to that last line of the story, realizing how little we know about the universe, or as Shakespeare put it, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamed of in your philosophy. We know we can't see color. There are colors we can't see. We know there are sounds we can't hear. The human experience of the universe is limited.
Yes.
And this is what science can offer us as we develop new tools to see the universe differently. So maybe the task for AI is to use it to help enhance our understanding of the world, not replace what we as humans bring to the world that nothing else can, right? The human intelligence, which is different from plant intelligence or the intelligence of a rock or a wind, and that we inhabit this earth together, or at least
Yes.
we might in the future.
Absolutely. Before closing this episode, I would like to mention a project that is very dear to my heart, and I'm actually very proud for having created it. And this is a project I am doing with a nonprofit, Savitas, and we are conducting a global AI literacy study, which will be presented in the House of Lords in London on the 22nd October 2026. Obviously, a nonprofit initiative. I am funding this with my own time and money. And we are looking into the general AI literacy, which is different from AI fluency. And what AI literacy means for several groups, such as educators, students, and young people, experienced professionals that are 45 years old and maybe older, and then AI literacy in small and mid-sized companies who don't have billions to invest and actually need to be very picky how they utilize AI to improve whatever they want to improve: product design, productivity, some processes, administration burden, etc. And it is, once again, very important for me to differentiate between fluency and literacy. And literacy is a foundational and conceptual thing. I don't want us just to be fluent in prompting. I want us to understand what we are touching and what is in front of us in order to have a voice in how the world will be designed when we increasingly interact with smart machines and with AI software. So that's kind of, a small story about this very important spend of my time, as I currently dedicate 2 full days a week in doing this, which is a lot as I'm a startup. And that was another episode of AI Snacks. I am tremendously grateful to Rae. We will meet you again very, very soon. And I'm very grateful to all the listeners, including our newcomers. Please find us on Instagram at Rae Mulstock. Please find me on LinkedIn. Please find Rae at her university, and please write us. You can contact me through my website, aiedutainment.ai. And I'm publishing a bi-weekly blog on what AI is and isn't. And now I would like to say goodbye for now. And I will see everyone next week. Thank you.
Goodbye.
And that concluded another episode of AI Snacks with Rae and Rae, your place for bite-sized inspiration on how AI is shaping our world and our future. And before you go, here's something exciting. This October, we'll be sharing a special AI literacy project at the House of Lords in London, a milestone moment for our mission to make AI knowledge accessible to everyone. We'll be unveiling new insights, stories, and educational tools to empower leaders, educators, and families to navigate the age of intelligent technologies with confidence and creativity. And I'd love to bring your voice into this journey. If you have questions, reflections, or topics you'd like us to explore, send them our way. Your curiosity shapes our content. You can connect with us on aiedutainment.ai or through our LinkedIn community, where we are building an open, curious, and supportive space for AI learners of all backgrounds. And if you haven't yet grabbed your copy of Rae and Rae and the Secrets of Sleep, our storytelling series that turns AI concepts into relatable adventures, please go on Amazon.com or on the book website www.raeandrobe. It's a beautiful way to start or deepen your journey into AI literacy, whether for yourself, your team, or your family. And so I will see you next week. Stay curious, stay kind, and keep learning. Together, we are not just talking about AI. We are shaping its story. Thank you.